Okay, it's 11 o'clock, and because we've got such a full agenda today, I don't want to waste any time, so I'm going to get us going for today. My name's Anne-Marie Towles. I'm a Professor of Social Care here at the University of Kent, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. Huge welcome to you all. This webinar, as you know, is to kick off Dementia Awareness Week in the UK. And so, welcome, and we're really excited to have some fantastic speakers today. And really showcase some of the amazing research that we've been doing here at Kent. So what I would like to do is a little bit of housekeeping just before we begin. We are recording today's webinar so that people who can't make the session live are able to watch it back. With that in mind, if you would prefer that your face is not on camera, given that it will then be shared online later, please navigate to the bottom of your screen where you can see stop video and press stop video. And it means that we'll still be able to hear you, you'll still be able to hear us, but we won't see your video stream, and it won't be published later online. We will be using presenter view, but I'm told that there is still a chance that some faces will be on. So we just want to be extra careful. I'm going to ask you all to stay muted, please, during the presentations, just to make sure that we can all hear really clearly what our speakers are saying. We've got 4 presentations today. I'm going to, time permitting, make sure that we take at least 1 live question between each of our talks. If we are running short of time, I'll go straight into the 2nd, 3rd and 4th presentations, and we'll have some questions at the end. But there is still an opportunity for you to be typing questions into the chat box. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, if you hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a box that says chat, and it looks like a speech bubble. If you click that, a little window will pop up and you can type your questions in there. And I will keep an eye on the chat, and also the speakers will too. So even if we don't answer your question right away, we will try and answer it before the end of the session. So bear with us. Okay, I think enough from me. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first presentation, which is Setting Research Priorities for Living with Dementia in Kent by Keith Oliver and Raza Michelita. Over to you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Just bear with us for a second while we make IT work and hope for the best. Team, I am now taking my eye off letting people in, so it's up to you to make sure that everyone's in the room. Still hoping for the best. Right. Can someone confirm that our screen is visible?
It is.
Lovely. Hi, everyone. Thank you for putting up with a moment that it took to set up IT. And welcome to the first presentation. My name is Raza. I'm a researcher. I'm the least interesting part of this pairing. And I'll swiftly hand over to Keith for his introduction.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Keith Oliver. I live in Canterbury, and I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease on New Year's Eve 2010. And I'm really proud to be here today to talk about this important project. You'll see the 3rd name on the list there is Laura Stembridge. She's currently travelling for 4 months around Europe, so she sends her apologies, but she's here with us in spirit.
Oh, I guess where I'd rather be, but I'm really pleased to be here today nonetheless. And before we go into the really interesting part, there's the usual disclaimer saying our opinions are not those of our funders, but thank you very much for the funding anyway. And I guess let's start with the premise of a project that looked into how people living with dementia can set research priorities. And the first step where this work started was acknowledging that usually, much that we try to involve people with lived experience more and more in research, it tends to happen too late. It might be at the application preparation stage when we apply for research funding. It is definitely later on, but it's usually the researchers calling the shots of what research is done on. So we wanted to take that one step back and hear specifically from people living with dementia. Again, acknowledging that other stakeholder views matter, carer or supporter views matter. But for this specifically, we wanted to look very much at what matters to people living with dementia. I'll hand over to Keith for a moment.
Yes, it was an important part of the project that the voices of people with dementia were heard and recognised and acted upon in formulating the priorities that the project sought to identify. And really, we started with a blank canvas, which is quite rare. So it was a real interesting, innovative project from that perspective, if nothing else. But there wasn't much more to it than that, which will unfold over the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, Keith. This moving around is an interesting little bit, but that's not how we started. So the way it started was that funding was given to set research priorities. And I had the luxury to go away and read up a lot of literature on how to do it well. And I remember, complaining to Anne-Marie that I just wasn't cracking it. I wasn't finding an answer. And then, when those light bulb moments come that come way too late and afterwards you think, but duh, is we realized that not only did we need to set research priorities based on the voices of people living with dementia, but we didn't know how to do it in a sufficiently inclusive way, which is then where the next bit of the work came in, on also setting up the approach, or what we call a methodology, for doing this work.
On this slide, you see the groups that formulated the project, beginning originally with a core group, which was Rasa, myself, and Laura, who I mentioned earlier. Laura was a psychology undergraduate at University of Kent, who then volunteered to support me and others with dementia in the local area. And why did I take part in the project, really? One reason is because I've known Rasa for a while and she asked me. Secondly, because the subject that we were looking to research was really important to me, and I felt to other people with dementia. And thirdly, I had the excellent support from Laura. But it's not just my input that was important. So very quickly, the three of us who were the core group identified Dawn, who's with us today, and Anne-Marie and Chris Norris, who I'm delighted to say are in the audience today, to join us as a working group. So their views, their perspectives, their experience was included. But again, it's still quite a narrow group. So we very quickly decided that we would identify people living in East Kent who belong to one of the user groups, which is affiliated to DEEP, that's the Dementia Engagement and Empowerment Project, but also are aligned to KMPT, our local health partnership trust. So from that, we formed a full group of 21 people with dementia, which really then informed the project more fully. And we'll talk more about that shortly.
Thank you. And this model, which we kind of came up on the fly, was coined by Anne-Marie as the rugby model. We entirely intend to trademark it. Just a bit of a joke that will either land or it won't today. So I can't really do this process of what the working group have done justice in a 10-minute presentation. That's just not how it works. But I guess in the uber summary that we can provide, it's to say that what the group worked on was to set up a concept, decide what are we actually looking at. And we settled on the topic of research priorities for living with dementia. And again, that may seem pretty obvious, but we spent quite a lot of time thinking, do we need the word care in it? How do we draw the boundary to say that we're not talking about biomedical research or gene testing or, anything like that? We're talking about the experience and social end of things. So this took a little bit of discussion. Then the group decided on the method of how do we make this inclusive? So we made sure, or we decided that it would be group-based, that we would come up with an initial list of priorities. And when I say we, it wasn't really Lara or myself. We made sure that as much as possible, the opinions and perceptions of people living with dementia always were at the front. We were there to do some of the, heavy lifting and some of the arrangements, but very much power to the voices with lived experience. We factored in an aspect of voting. We felt that that may be the best way to rank things. Just let people vote on the areas that they've chosen to be the most important. So all that process, really, I can't put in a single slide. You'll just have to read the papers that we write. But it was really a wonderful demonstration that not only people living with dementia can be participants of this work, but they can decide the process or the method by which it happens. We also decided on the practicalities, but for that, we've got pictures of how it actually went, and I'll hand over to Keith.
Yeah, some various phrases like co-production, co-creation are often banded out there, understandably, with good intention by professionals. This project really was co-created and co-produced with people living with dementia. And as you see from the slide there, the room was packed. The working group didn't know how many people with dementia were going to turn up. We didn't know how the day was going to go. We spent 5 hours in this room really working hard as a large group of people, supported by some young people and some more mature volunteers who helped us alongside the facilitation led by Rasa and Laura. And from that, we then came up with the priorities, as Rasa quite rightly said. And you can see from those slides how engaged those people were in that particular workshop.
Thank you, Keith. I think we need to speed up now. So I'll just say quite quickly that in that process, what we started with was a list of priority areas which came from the working group discussions. We grouped them, we presented them on a set of cards, and we asked people to say, what else? What have we missed out? And we had this whole list on the right-hand side of things that, people added to this process. We were quickly able to categorize some of them back into those 5 boxes that you can see, or 5 cards that people had. But what you see now in gray on the right-hand side were some aspects that weren't picked up in our initial set of priority areas. So we also added that full list. We made it possible for people to vote not only on this kind of initial list of ideas, but added on other things for people to vote on too. And this is what we ended up with. We ended up with 3 priority areas that received more than half of the votes in the room. And again, only people living with dementia were able to cast a vote. Now, what you see here is just a very simplified summary. I'll show you a moment later where you can find much more detail. And the beauty, particularly for researchers who may want to take up some of this work and focus their research on priorities for people living with dementia, the beauty really is in the detail. Keith, have you got anything to add to the slide?
No, just to say that when you bring together 21 people with dementia, you're going to get probably 21 priority areas. So there was a great deal of discussion around consensus, and agreement, and trying to arrive at something which everyone could sign up to. And that's why these 3 areas are a bit broad, but also really relevant to the life of those of us living with dementia.
Thank you, Keith. And one tiny other thing to mention to this is that once we've done the voting, we didn't leave it there. We've got our 3 priority areas. That's it, off we go. What we did is we spent time blowing them back out again, saying if these are the 3 things to focus on, then what should the specific focus be? What would the questions be? And those questions ended up quite dissimilar to the first kind of wish list of illustrations that we had, really showing that this back and forth worked rather than starting from a completely blank page.
Yeah, we recognised, all 21 of us, that there needs to be the so what question asked. So what difference is this work going to make to the lives of those of us living with dementia? That was the key question that really drove me forward, and I know a number of other people who were in the room at the time. And Rasa has already taken this project to the international conference at Krakow, where she spoke, and we're aiming to speak at the national conference in November in the UK. But also we will publish material both for people with dementia and for professionals who are researching the subject, because this week is Dementia Action Week, and we really want the awareness that this week raises to turn into action. This project hopefully will be part of that.
Brilliant, Keith. And I can't top that. So no more parting words apart from saying, please scan the QR code and download our summary. I know our very glamorous IT tech, Teresa, today will also post the summary link in the chat. Thank you so much for listening. And I think we've got time for perhaps one question.
Wow, fantastic. And we do indeed. Thank you so much, Raza and Keith. So would anybody, there is one question in the chat, but before I go to the chat, is there anybody that would like to raise their hand and ask a question now? Let me just have a look, because there's quite a lot of you. Anne-Marie Norris, do you want to come in and ask a question?
Yeah, have you had any feedback from when you took it to Poland?
Yes. So we did have feedback of people being interested in how we've done it. And my message to people has been, by all means, have a look at how we've done it ourselves. But appreciate that research priorities may change, you know, from 1 week to like next year, you may come up with different priorities. Different things may work for different groups. So while I was saying, yes, check out our work and do it the way we've done it, maybe the main message is it's possible. Do it in the way that works for you, but make sure to involve people living with dementia from the word go. So that was kind of the feedback or the dialogue that we had. And I'll tell you more about Krakow behind the scenes, Anne-Marie, because I can get in touch with separately.
And just to answer the question as well, Anne-Marie, and not just one voice of person with dementia as well, to engage with more than one voice.
Thank you, Keith. That's a really good point.
Okay, I'm going to prepare us to move on to the next speaker so we don't run out of time. While they are just sorting themselves out and getting ready, I will just quickly answer the question in the chat, which is that for this particular work that Raza and Keith were talking about, by lived experience, you meant people living with dementia rather than their carers, didn't you, Raza? So,
yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And the slides and the video recording will be available, everyone. So I know there's a few people asking about that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our next, which is a team effort, our next speakers, talking about healthy you, keeping yourself healthy while supporting someone living with dementia. And this is a collaborative presentation from Mike Parrish, Winnie Henry, David Ross, and Barbara Shilarova.
Fantastic. Anne-Marie, can you confirm you can see our slides correctly?
We can.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. What a fantastic previous presentation. So as you heard, the first presentation was about people who were diagnosed with dementia. The second presentation is focusing on those who support people living with dementia. So my name is Barbara Shilarova. I work at the University of Kent as a researcher, and I'm joined today by my three colleagues, Mike Parrish, Winnie Henry, and David Ross, who all are carers of someone living with dementia. And the focus of this presentation is on how we can best support unpaid carers of people living with dementia to look after their own health and well-being. So as we all know, at the moment, it is estimated that here in the UK, there are around 700,000 family members and friends who support someone living with dementia. And in the literature, they are often called as unpaid carers, supporters, family carers.
Excuse me, love. Can we drop the stuff a bit?
Oh, sorry. Did I say suffer? I said support.
Right. No, you said suffer, and you said it twice, and it's.
No. Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Maybe I'm mispronouncing correctly, but I'm using the word support.
Oh, right. Support. Right. Okay.
No, sorry. I'm sorry. I wouldn't use that. I look like people who support someone with dementia, but I will try to pronounce better. Thank you. Important comment and point. So, yeah, but these family members and friends may never use these labels to describe themselves. So, there is an evidence that unpaid carers, that caring itself is associated with a lot of positive aspects. But we also know from evidence when you care for someone living with dementia, you may experience poorer health and well-being. And carers, in their own words, told us, it is exhausting to be a carer, it takes so much out of you. And carers themselves also highlighted, it's time to recognize how the caring impacts family members and friends of those living with dementia. And the key aim of this project was to develop research application that is co-produced with unpaid carers of people living with dementia. And the focus of this research application is on how we can best support unpaid carers of people living with dementia to look after their health and well-being. And I know the term co-production is used a lot in healthcare, in adult social care, and also in research. And we thought we would tell you very briefly how we approach co-production in this project. So we were originally a team of 10. It's now a team of 9 people, and 2 of us are researchers, and 7 of us are carers. And we all live across England and Scotland. And carers themselves either looked after their parents or their partners, and they either live in the same household or in the different households. And I think the carers groups nicely illustrate how diverse carers are when it comes to their caring experiences. And we worked on this application for 1 year, and we met every month for 2 hours online. And for example, during the first 6 months, we discussed what the focus of this research application should be. And during the 6 months, we have identified 9 key health and well-being concerns experienced by unpaid carers of people living with dementia. And these are the key 8 health key concerns identified by 8 unpaid carers. And it included exercise, nutrition, coping with stress, coping with terminal illness, coping with emotions, getting help, knowledge, and time management. And my colleagues, Vinny, Mike, and David will tell you about 3 of these concerns. Vinny, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I found as a carer for my husband who had vascular dementia that the lack of knowledge was the main thing that I had to conquer. From he was first diagnosed and I was handed a bundle of papers and told to go away and read them, I realized that I was going to have a hard fight to get the best possible care for him. Not one professional appeared to have the answers that I was looking for, and I was getting fobbed off constantly. My way of coping with this was to stubbornly dig in my heels and keep asking for answers. It required a great amount of stubbornness on my part, and I had to become a bit less sensitive than I would normally be to rejection. And all this at a time when all you want to do is the best for the one you love, and you just don't know how. However, the answers are out there. It's a case of if someone shuts the door in your face, you just keep knocking until it's opened again. Don't let anyone tell you that they do not have the answer to a question you're asking if the question seems sensible and valid. My answer always was, well, if you don't know the answer, you have a duty of care to my loved one. So please find an answer that I can understand and work with to make life as easy as possible for my husband. It's not easy to make folk listen to you, and because you're vulnerable, tired, sick with worry about the future, it's very easy to allow yourself and your questions to get brushed aside. But there is one thing you should always remember. When it comes to dementia, you, the carer, are living with it 24/7. You are the expert and deserve to be listened to.
Thank you, Vinny. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, and hello everybody. I chose the topic coping with emotion because as the main and only carer for my wonderful husband Tom, it was something I had the greatest difficulty manage during the whole journey of his dementia. Things like stress, anger, exhaustion, sadness, and fear were constant and unwelcome companions. And however much you may want to, you cannot hand those things over to somebody else to resolve. They are you have to deal with them yourself. It's it's not quite like somebody coming in and giving me a break by giving him a wash or feeding him. So these are constant emotions that you have to deal with and do impact your role as a carer. And of course, we all know that if you bottle up emotions, the long-term impact is well known in terms of your ability to function properly. And as a carer, you have to be on board all of the time. You have to be top of the game at all times. We all know, so recognizing that we're stressed is the first step. With such little time to think because there's so much to do, you might not even be aware that you're accumulating frustrations along with exhaustions. And sometimes it takes somebody else or another person to tell us that we need a break. However, as I found out and as I felt, this is not always possible and will conflict with our duty of care and love for the person that we are caring for. So you're in a game of contrast of what's good for you and what you need to do. We know it, and we've heard already, so much care is done by this huge hidden army of unpaid workers. And because they're hidden, we don't see the difficulties that they have on a daily basis. So we simply don't see it in our society. Is when you know somebody's a carer and you're a carer too, you don't really need to say very much. You just nod and they know. And that's a really important thing. And that leads me to the kind of things that you can do. For example, joining a support group, getting knowledge from other people. And just a couple of things. So first, work out and understand the impact of caring. Second, realize that we're being emotionally affected by our role. And thirdly, to find out how we can plan for our own well-being. And if you look on the slide at the bottom right, and I'm sure these will be available afterwards, some of the little ideas about how we can find ways to fix a break and to find care support. So it's going to be different for everybody, but it's the first step.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. And David, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's David. I'm a retired engineer, and I was a carer for my late wife who had frontotemporal dementia with overlapping amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Everyone is different. That phrase still rings in my ears. It's true and may even be a catalyst for future research. All the textbooks in the world cannot prepare you for the difficulties you will experience looking after a loved one diagnosed with a terminal neurological illness. Not only are they different, you are also different, and not everyone reacts in the same way. You have no idea how long this caring role will last, how intensive it will be, and how you will be affected. You are so consumed with caring for this individual 24/7, you may not initially recognize the deterioration in their condition that is slowly evolving. From being a vibrant and intelligent human being to a helpless and somewhat pathetic individual, totally dependent on you for all their bodily needs. What is worse, you are totally consumed with their well-being that you completely ignore the second most important person in the room, yourself. I was fortunate in that my parents brought me up to be self-sufficient and taught me many life and domestic skills. This didn't make me immune from the stress and trauma that the caring role brings. You don't have time to think about yourself, nor do you care. You only have one person in mind. I realised that social interaction was necessary for both of us. There was no time to dwell on my situation. I had to be mentally as well as physically active as I could be. I may have been grieving, but I had to be focused and occupied with hobbies, time permitting. And I bought a drum kit to bash away the stress. It was either that or punching holes in doors. I will never forget the experience we went through. It has changed me. I'm a different person now, more empathetic and understanding, and aware that more needs to be done. It is a travesty of our society that one has to go through all that suffering just to realise how important and necessary the care and caring role is and how it needs to be strengthened and supported. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. I want an important message at the end from David. It's crucial to be aware how important and necessary the care and caring role is. Thank you, everyone, for the attention, and please get in touch if you have any follow-up questions.
Thank you so much. What fantastic presentation. Another fantastic presentation. So we have got time for one question. Would anybody like to raise their hands? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet? Just going to look through in case anyone's raising their hand. I can't see. Okay, then in that case, could I ask you to respond to a question that was in the chat from Neil? So Raza's responded, but I think it's also relevant to your work, Barbara. So Neil says, great presentation. We have also been doing some community co-design. Sometimes I think it may be too broad in terms of project direction, and group members may feel a lack of direction. I wonder if you have thoughts on how to give that direction whilst also listening to new views and ideas.
I wonder, David, Mike, or Vinny, do you want to take this up? Like, how did you feel? Yeah, David, I think you unmuted yourself. Please go ahead.
Maybe I unmuted myself by mistake. I think that everyone has to have common knowledge of everything that's going on round about you in all the different groups. I mean, even this morning I saw that I need to know more about what other groups are doing, and I think we should try and find a way of getting more together. And instead of having a national conference about biomedical research and genetics, why not get one about lived experience?
Great idea. Fantastic. And I think we all share the challenges around that idea of co-production, and the fact that people can come at this from different perspectives, and the time it takes. And I think there's always that line that you have to walk, isn't there, between trying to generate all of the ideas and do everything for everyone whilst also deliver to project timelines and schedules. So yeah, really useful to hear about these great examples of co-production and co-design. Thank you. Okay, so we're going back into the room now for our next speakers. So the next presentation is from James Cale and Dawn Horn, and it's around adapting the Easy Read the Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit for older people accessing social care. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Great. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about adapting the Easy Read Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit, or ASCOT as it's known, specifically for older people who are accessing social care. Right, so study aims and objectives. So first of all, what's ASCOT? For people that are not familiar with it, so ASCOT's designed to measure social care related quality of life, or SCARE-QUAL as we call it. There are 8 domains as part of ASCOT, and these sort of pertain to 8 or sometimes 9 questions. So it's a structured questionnaire. It's mainly used in quantitative analysis, which means you get a number or a score at the end once you've finished answering all the questions, and that gives you an indication of your social care related quality of life. So when it was first developed and tested, it was done so with older social care users, but often people, or exclusively people, who could self-report. They were home care users, but these were people that could quite happily and easily take part in things like user experience surveys, interviews, and things like that. You can see on the screen here just a link to the ASCOT website. You can have a look at all the different types of tools that are on there. So I mentioned the 8 domains. So these are all basically just parts of all of our lives that we can all relate to, that we can all comment on. So things like being clean, comfortable, what you eat, what you drink, feeling safe, your home, being treated with dignity, what you do with your time, occupation. So that's not a job kind of role. It's just how you spend your day, the kinds of things that you're doing, and that you're doing meaningful activities. We have control over daily life, and then your social life. So that's things like the relationships that you have with your family and friends. So first of all, ASCOT Easy Read. There was already an ASCOT Easy Read. This used sort of simplified wording, pictures, things like that, to aid understanding and support people to go through the questions. Now, this was developed specifically and tested specifically with adults with learning disabilities and autism. But what happens was we get asked all the time, lots of requests, can we use this tool particularly for older people living in their own homes, receiving social care, and often this would be people living with mild to moderate dementia or other kind of cognitive impairment. So what the aim of this particular project was to adapt the existing Ascot Easy Read specifically for older people accessing social care. So what we wanted to do was test whether our changes kind of help people understand the questions and made it more able for them to answer the questions and give their views and for them to be able to have a voice. So what we did, so we had a co-production working group. Co-production has been mentioned a lot this morning, and this was an amazing thing for us. It was really, really helpful. So we had a group of 8 older people, primarily those living with dementia and their sort of supporters and carers as well. They were an absolutely integral part of the development of this tool. So we would sit in our groups. We would have our members suggest, discuss, reach consensus, lots of discussion around the tool. And as I said, the contribution of the group was absolutely crucial and important, so much so that it would have been absolutely impossible to have done the work without them. It just wouldn't be done. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about what we actually did. So you can see the sort of 3 stages here. In stage 1, everybody in the group looked at the Ascot ER, the original one. We adapted it, we reviewed it, we adapted it again and reviewed it again. We did this a number of times before we were then ready to take it out for what we call cognitive interviews. So that's testing it with people who would normally struggle with standard questionnaire. So that was phase 2, to kind of carry out these interviews. Once we'd done that, we would go back to our co-production group, review the findings from these interviews. We'd make more changes to hopefully improve the tool, make it better, make it easier for people to understand. And then we would take the tool out for more testing, more interviews, and then we would go back to the co-production group. So phases 2 and 3 that you can see on the screen here, we did that 3 times in total for this project. So we would go out, test it, see what works, see what doesn't work so well, come back to the group, discuss it, make changes, and then go back out again for testing. So just really briefly, I'm going to show you some of the changes that we made as part of the developing the new version of this tool. There was lots and lots of development and discussion about the use of illustrations. I cannot possibly summarize it here. We spent hours in our group talking about this. In the end, we didn't use any illustrations whatsoever, having developed them and tested them and everything. But you know, that was all well and good, and that was part of the whole process. We reordered some of the questions, we added some bits into the questions. These were parts that were more relatable, more relevant, particularly for older people. We made some changes to the wording of the response options, so that's where people would tick their box and answer the question. There's this exclusion of what we call qualifiers in the response options, which was things like, it's okay, it's really good, it's very bad. That was something that we didn't find that people in this particular group needed, but it was very helpful for people with learning disabilities and or autism. So there's just some of the changes that we made there. I'm going to flash up really briefly just some different versions of the tool that we went through. So on the left, you can see what we started with, and in the middle, a slightly different image to go with the question, and also some different wording. And on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the finished version, which was, again, different wording, things like having only one box underlined, having the little tick in the box, different wording for the response options. So, okay, it's really quick, but just to kind of give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the changes that were made. I hope that's kind of helpful. So now I've talked about, obviously, the co-production group. I'm going to hand you over to Dawn, who was part of that group, and she's just going to tell you a little bit about her experience as being part of the group and also being part of the research process as a whole. Whilst I do that, the slide that you'll see is a summary of the work, which was also co-produced and co-developed with the group. So Dawn, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dawn. Shortly after I was diagnosed with a double dementia, Alzheimer's and vascular, I thought that was the end of my world, to be honest. Didn't think I had any more usefulness. And I had a phone call asking me, would I be interested in looking at research with the Ascot questionnaire? I had no idea what Ascot was. I had no idea really what questionnaires were. But I thought, well, why not give it a go? So I went along. It was really, really interesting. but I didn't want just to be a passenger. I wanted to really be involved. And as we went along, I realised that I might have dementia, but my voice still counted. And when we looked at the different questions and realised that some of them were okay, some of them weren't, sometimes it took a little while to change them, sometimes it took a whole morning to change one question because we couldn't get it down in a way that was short, but you could understand. We looked at the pictures, and one of the things I was against the pictures because I said, I can only look at things for a very short time. And when we looked at the pictures, while I'd worked out what the pictures were, and some of them were quite amusing, including the lady in the shower with bubbles, but we won't go into that. You spent a lot of energy working out what the pictures were, and then you had nothing left to answer the questions. So we decided in the long run to do away with the pictures. But the whole thing, interacting with other people, knowing your voice was being listened to, maybe what you said was wrong, but listening to other people playing with it was a most exhilarating experience, and it has encouraged me to go on and say yes to a lot of other things, even when most of the time I don't know what I'm saying yes to, including going on webinars. But to feel that I have dementia and I can still make a difference is the most important thing.
Thank you, Dawn. That's fantastic. Thank you, Dawn. And hopefully that gives everyone kind of a little bit of insight and a little bit of, you can kind of imagine what the working groups were like. In fact, Keith, in his presentation earlier, flashed up some pictures of theirs, and it really reminded me a lot of our working groups. Lots of people sitting around the table, working very hard, looking at the questions, reading the questions, rereading the questions, looking at illustrations, and making those changes there. We now hope we've got, you know, a tool that is essentially much more understandable, much more relatable, and much more accessible, specifically for older people accessing social care services, and including those who might be living with mild to moderate dementia. So I think we'll call that to a close. We might have another minute or so if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, James. Do you want to take the slide down and then we can see everybody? Thank you. Right, another fantastic presentation, and I was involved in that project, so I always really enjoy hearing Dawn talk about it, because I'm really glad that you enjoyed being part of it, Dawn. We loved hearing your views, and thank you for your contribution. So would anyone like to ask a question to Dawn or James about their presentation? No. James, do you want to say something about where the tool will be available for anybody who wants to use it?
Yeah, sure. So we've got the ASCOT website, which I'm sure will be flashed up on. It's certainly included in the presentation that I just gave, so it'll be in there. I think it's on the second slide. But people can navigate to the website. There's all the different types of tools that people can access and use. There is a specific place for this new version of the tool. I think at the moment it is currently, I can see that, that's great. It's currently a kind of coming soon, but it will be popping up there very shortly, and it'll be available for people to download and for people to use. There'll also be an additional couple of videos which explain, you know, how it was developed. There's going to be a bit more from Dawn and also some of the other people that took part in the research, and they were in the co-production group. There's a kind of long and short videos about their experience of doing the development work and also the tool itself. So hopefully that's going to be really helpful for people. And of course, if there are any further questions, people are more than welcome to contact me directly. My email is also on the website and on the PSSIU website. I'm fairly easy to find because my name is unusual. There's too many vowels and they're in the wrong order. So if you look for that, you'll find me, and do feel free to make contact. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on. But if anyone has any other questions, please do use the chat, and the speakers can be responding in writing, even if we don't have time while we're talking. So last but not least, it's a pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Stacey Rand, who is going to be talking about measuring the quality of life outcomes of people living with dementia and their carers. Over to you, Stacey.
Thank you, and especially thank you to Raza for adjusting the camera so those online also can realise I think perhaps the shortest member of the research team in the room. So as was said, I'm going to be talking today about a project looking at outcomes of people with dementia who are unable to self-report and their carers. To make mention, this project is perhaps a little different from the others presented today in that it was conducted a few years ago. And also, it didn't use co-production within the methods for this particular project, but it does draw on other studies that used co-production. This particular project, though, we did have public and patient involvement as part of the core team. So the people listed here, we've got a number of people who are employed as academic researchers, but we also had two people, Della Ogunleye and Akhtar Patel, who were part of the team and both of whom were carers of someone with dementia. And I think it's very important to acknowledge their really valuable contribution to this project. They were involved throughout, very engaged, and gave some fantastic feedback. And I'd just like to mention that Della is someone that we've worked with for many years. Some of you may have known her, and sadly she died last November, but she was a fantastic person who was involved in the research community, and I think a great role model and example for many of us. So a bit of background for this project. Things that we knew when we started this project back in 2019, so that's quite a while ago, is that social care is really important in terms of both supporting people with dementia and also their family carers or supporters, however they like to talk about them. And when I'm talking about social care, just to kind of put a little bit of examples on that, what I mean are things like home care, but also day centres and activities, support groups, giving short breaks, but also organisations that help with information, advocacy and advice. So there's a whole range of different organisations and sources of support that come under that umbrella, but they're hopefully all working with the same aim. And that's about improving people's well-being or their quality of life, and also helping people to stay independent as they'd like to be. Now, one of the important things around this, we could maybe call it a sector, but the various people working in this space, is that to understand how well they're doing, there's regularly data collected. And that data, importantly, foregrounds the voice of people using the support services. So that's both people with dementia and their carers. But the way in which that data has been collected historically, so I've given an example here, the adult social care survey, so that's previously been going on for over a decade. The data collected there has inadvertently been excluding people who can't give their own opinion using a questionnaire. That was not the intention, but just because of the way it's run, that was what was happening in practice. The reason that's important is that data being collected was being used by people to make decisions. It was being used to plan services, to decide funding and so on. So it's really important that people are included and that they're counted. So the aim of this project was thinking, how can we develop better ways of collecting data so that everyone's able to give some kind of voice and not be left out? So this study drew on two of the ASCOT questionnaires, which Dawn and James were just talking about one version. These are two other versions. And I'm going to show them very briefly, but just to say each of these has behind it years of work, very similar to what James and Dawn were talking about, to develop these questions. So the first one is what we call the proxy version. And in this, actually, James and I and other colleagues worked with family carers and supporters, but also care workers to develop a set of questions that could be answered where someone couldn't give their own response. And so to stop them being just missed out, then what we could do is ask someone else to give a view. And a lot of work was put into thinking, how is that okay? What's the best way of collecting the data? Lots and lots of discussion. And we came up with the questionnaire that's shown here. But back in 2019, we got the question, but we hadn't road tested it. So that's what this project was about. What does it work like if you're actually using it in a survey? The second question is a questionnaire that was developed. I was involved in this back in 2012, which feels like a lifetime ago. And this involved lots of carers, at least 31 in the work that I did, but that also drew on other work before. And this has a set of questions that's very similar to the other versions of ASCOT, but it's been adapted to fit the particular views and perspective of carers. And this involved a whole range of carers, people looking after and helping and supporting people with a range of support needs. And that included supporters of people with dementia, but not exclusively. So in this study, we wanted to ask, well, if we just take that group of people, how well does it work? And that's what we wanted to kind of dig into, particularly because some people said, actually, we need a different questionnaire. So this study was trying to say, do we? So we sent these two questionnaires out. We specifically tried to find a family member or close friend of someone living with dementia who was living at home, who was using at least one kind of social care support or service, and where the person with dementia wouldn't have been able to answer the sorts of usual questions that would have been sent out. And what we asked the carer to do, the supporter, was to fill in either a paper or postal questionnaire or an online questionnaire. So we're using these two different approaches. And those questionnaires included both the ASCOT proxy and the ASCOT carer that I showed previously. And to give you an idea of who took part, we had just over 300 people respond. 3/4 were women. The average age was 62. Almost half were they estimated more than 50 hours of support each week. And they were often, 58% were living in the same household, and many were supporting parents or partners or spouses. So again, that gives a little bit of a flavour. Now this slide, I feel like I have to apologise in advance to remind everyone, but it's a really important thing in this study. So when we designed it and we started, we had no idea what was going to happen. We actually began in September 2019 and we began data collection in January 2020, and little did we know that we were going to have a global pandemic. So this slide here shows basically what happened during the lifetime of the study. And not that I'm wanting to take you back there, but if you can imagine back, this was what we were going through as we were collecting the data. We had the first lockdown, and then we had this yo-yoing backwards and forwards of restrictions either being eased or tightened again. And although that was not part of the design, that became a really important part of this study. So the first thing is what did we learn about these questionnaires? And I think the main takeaway was that they seemed to work. We were able to collect some really good data, and that was even with the challenge of the pandemic. And I think here a huge thank you to every single person who took part and supported us. It really was remarkable that we had such good engagement during such a challenging time. From what we collected, we were able to see that the two questionnaires worked in the way we wanted them to. So as James and Dawn were talking about the questionnaire development, there's a phase where we're trying to get the questions as good as possible. Then when we do the road testing of the questions, there's an important bit of technical work that goes in the background, because when we just look at the data, it's very hard to see exactly what's going on. And the technique I used here is also used by exam boards because it's a way of working out if someone's cheating. So in the same way, the same kind of analysis is used to test the questions and see if they're working in the way that we want them to. And we also used other ways of checking whether it was valid. Are the questions, when we had in mind when we wrote them, are they actually measuring what we thought they would be? Sometimes they don't, so that's really important to check. And also, are they internally consistent, or do we have a question that doesn't fit with the others? So we were asking these kinds of questions. And we found that the questions were valid. They did measure what we expected. They were reliable. They were consistent. But importantly, when we came to the proxy questions, we asked people to rate the questions in 2 different ways. And what we found is that one way worked better than the other. So if we asked a family or friend carer to say, to rate quality of life, it worked better when we asked them to say what they thought their loved one would say. And that worked better than us asking them what they thought in their opinion. And now we wouldn't have known that, because when we talked to them in focus groups, they said, oh, both work really well. And actually they quite liked having both of them. But when we got the data, we could see one was working better than the other. So we actually say, in terms of collecting the data, we ask both because people like that. But when you actually use the data, it's better to use one rating over the other. And this is really important because this then tells us that these questionnaires, that so much work has gone into producing, so many people and their contributions, we know that they're robust, they're reliable and valid, and that we can use them in research. Just to kind of give a little bit of an insight into what people told us, I think it was really remarkable, certainly for me, to look at the kinds of things people were saying where they had needs. So this is where their quality of life wasn't as good as they would have liked it to be. Particularly carers, so the bold numbers are where over 30% of people were saying they have an unmet need. And the carers were really indicating, a significant proportion were indicating they had needs in pretty much all of the areas apart from feeling safe. And that's mirrored also for people with dementia. And I would say that this was data collected during the pandemic, so that's important to bear in mind. But I think the takeaway message from this is a challenge to us as a community, us as a society, about how do we support people, particularly what social care services and wider support is offering. How can we be thinking about the needs, the particular concerns of people with dementia and their carers living at home, and what can we be doing to address what people are telling us? And these insights are so important because they give us that ammunition that this is important, this matters. So as I've said before, the high percentage of unmet needs, I think means if we're measuring it and we're able to give the numbers, it means that it's less easy to ignore, and this is important, particularly when stimulating discussion and engaging with people. We found that some carers are at higher risk than others. So those with their own health challenges, those supporting someone for more than 50 hours a week, and those experiencing financial difficulties. And again, I think this is a critical part of the discussion that we need to be having, particularly in engaging with health and social care services. And as much as the ethos on paper is there that services need to be thinking about the carer, I think that this is a real challenge to think about how we can do better. And certainly the work I do, and in this, what people were telling us is that we can't really think about one or the other. We know that our loved ones, we're in relationships together, and it's so important that services are thinking holistically. The final point, and this I think is, again, I don't want to say it because it's shocking, but I think it helps contextualize it. That when we looked at the data over time, we found that quality of life went up and down for people with dementia, but for carers, it didn't seem to. And one way of describing that is that the COVID lockdowns were effectively like life as normal for carers. And I've used this a few times in speaking with people who don't have experience of caring. And it's a good way of getting, because they have experienced a COVID lockdown. So it's a good way of me getting to kind of get them to think, okay, this is a word here, relationships with family, friends, and a statistic, but what that qualitatively might feel like, that's one way of describing it. And also, I think, I've used a bit technical language here, but cumulative negative impact of the pandemic. What we were seeing was that as the pandemic progressed, there seemed to be a dipping off of quality of life. I know thankfully now we're beyond that, but I think that's also a challenge, that what did we learn from the pandemic and our response? And particularly if anything like this happens again, do we need to be better prepared, particularly for people living with dementia and their carers? What could have been done differently to have made that experience, and particularly supporting quality of life, better? So again, challenging questions, but this is showing what you can do with the kinds of questionnaires presented here. And just to put the usual disclaimer and email address and website if needed.
Thank you so much, Stacey. I couldn't unmute myself there for a second. Really interesting, and I think draws out some really important lessons, actually. And it's really nice to see not only the development of the questionnaire and the work that goes into it, but following James and Dawn's presentation as well, but also follow that through to look at what the data tells us and why it's so important that we have these measures and these questionnaires. So really nice, I thought, to have those two side by side, those presentations. Thank you. Right, we are very short of time. I can see lots of people saying how nice it was and how much they've enjoyed these presentations. Would anybody like to raise their hand quickly before we go to ask a question of Stacey? I'm just going to check. I've got to scroll through.
I can see here a comment from Sarah, and it sounds like the findings I was presenting really resonated with her experience. So I'm glad, and also as I was describing about how it's presented. Again, I think this is so easy for people who don't have direct experience of caring. It's hard to imagine. So coming up with different ways of helping others to have that empathy is really important. And I'm trying to remember whose presentation, I think it was Raza's, about training for health and social care professionals. I think, working together to come up with good ways of getting people to take different perspectives and think about it is really important. So I'd say thank you to everyone, and good synergies here across different bits of work.
Thanks, Stacey. Okay, without further ado, I am going to wrap this session up because I can see that some people are rushing off as it is to other meetings and commitments. So huge thank you to all of you who have attended today and given up an hour of your time to be here. I hope that it's been interesting and useful. The video will be made available online with the slides, and we will share those through your sign-up information. But yes, if you follow us on social media or you check our websites, then you'll also be able to find them through those means. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.